Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Of course, if you desire to do so, you could turn toward me. So, perhaps you know that Shakyamuni Buddha, one of his basic teachings was what's called the three fundamental characteristics of experience, or just the three fundamental characteristics. And those three are dukkha, which usually gets translated as suffering. I might say discontentment. And then the second one is anicca, impermanence. And the third one is anatta, not self. So these are three characteristics of all of our experience. Dukkha, meaning that no specific experience we have leads to lasting contentment. No matter what we get or attain or achieve or manage to acquire, that's not going to satisfy our desire indefinitely. And then secondly, anicca, impermanence, nothing that we experience is permanent. And thirdly, anatta, nothing that we experience can somehow be rounded up to a stable, fundamentally existent self. Okay. I want to talk about that third part a little bit today. In Zen, in modern American Zen, we often talk about this as the ego self, the ego identity. And I think because of the way the ego identity plays in our practice, because of the role it has on the stage as we're practicing, we tend to think of it as being bad. And so, we walk into the door and the program, the mission is to eliminate the ego self. And so, the general tone of the talk around this topic is, the ego, connotation, bad. And I wanted to explore that a little bit. So, I'd like to suggest to you that the ego self, it's not bad, it's not negative, nothing like that. What it is a tool. So we come into this world and when we first show up, and thinking here of Heidi Sensei weeks ago when she just arrived, when we first are born into the world, we don't have any concepts, we don't have any shortcuts for managing our experience. And so in a lot of ways, the experience is just totally raw. And you can see that on the little infant's face, there's just light and sound and things going by. And they have no way of processing it. They have no idea of what anything is. It's all just stuff happening, and they're kind of in a daze. And that state of being is a pretty good illustration of what's going on here. So in that state of being, the little baby has no expectations about how anything is supposed to be. They don't have any desires even as such. They have just like raw animal drives, but they don't want anything the way we adults want things. And at the same time, no tools for dealing with the universe, no concepts in which to organize their sensory experiences. So it's all just raw. It's all just a muddle, and they are not able to do anything. They're not able to work with the world and act in the world because they don't have any of these tools, any of these conceptual tools to help them get a handle on anything and sort their experience into this is this, that is that. And so they're kind of stuck, but stuck without any sense that anything should be other than what it is. Pretty interesting. So we show up in that state, and as soon as we show up, as soon as we're born, we start to build tools. We start to build concepts. We start to, through trial and error, figure out how to organize the sensory experience that's coming into this mind. And we get one tool, we get another tool, we get another tool, we get another tool. And so we have all of these different concepts, these different little frameworks, these different tools for dealing with what's going on. And the ego is one of those. The ego is an important tool that we have for getting by each day, for getting through our experience. And what does that mean? I mean, in one sense, it means the ego is neither good nor bad. I can't help but think of the line from the book and the movie Shane. A gun is just a tool. It's neither good nor bad, no better or worse than the man that wields it. And so the ego, it's not good or bad. We don't need to be down about the fact that the ego is there. The only problem is when we are unable to set that tool down, when we become attached to it. That's our favorite word. When we attach to the ego and won't let it go, can't let it go. So, again, using this analogy of a tool, the world is full of these different situations. And in terms of the concepts that we have all kinds of different tools to deal with those different situations. But what if you can't put one down? I remember Shigan Roshi made this illustration during a talk. If you always have something in your hand, you have so much more difficulty getting to the next thing. If I want to take the drink of water and I have this thing that I can't get rid of, I'm gonna just make a mess. And excuse me. Again, I'm thinking of our baby. She's at a phase right now where she doesn't entirely understand how to put something down. Sometimes she can drop something, which sometimes involves waving it around and then it ends up falling. But a lot of times she's moving through the space upstairs and she's picked up 3 crayons in one hand, and now she wants to stand up on the coffee table, and so she's reaching that same hand up to grab the edge of the coffee table. Her hand is full of crayons, and she can't grip the table very well because she doesn't understand that she has to put the other thing down first. And it's the same crawling around the floor. She'll crawl half a room away with something in her hand that she just hasn't occurred to her to let go of it or something. And we do the same with our ego self, with our sense of self. We feel like, oh, I have to drag this into every situation. I have to have this at all moments. Well, not really. So if we think the ego is a tool, that any of our conceptual constructs are tools, are you familiar with the idea of a model in science or math? The idea that the world is the way it is, and we build a model to model it, lack of a better word, a model to represent how the actual world is functioning. And the model allows us to predict what might happen next based on what we already know, right? So maybe the most obvious example to work with here is the Newtonian model of gravity, right? So Isaac Newton is famous for having come up with this equation that models how an object falls, okay? And we do calculations with that model. And if you go to high school, you learn what the calculation is. You learn the formula for the acceleration of an object as it falls. And that model was the model for centuries until Einstein discovered that a more precise model was possible with a whole different way of looking at how gravity is and functions. And Einstein's model of gravity allows more precise predictions and calculations in the circumstances where that kind of thing is necessary. Two different models. Probably Einstein's model is not 100% precise either. Probably in another 3 centuries we'll have something even more advanced. But even Einstein's model is so sophisticated that for most day-to-day applications, everyone still uses the Newtonian model. It's close enough for most of what you would care to do in terms of calculating gravity's effects. I bother to say all of this because every other conceptual understanding that we have is like that. It has some predictive value. It has some utility as you do what you're doing in the day. You have this conceptual construct about the M66 crosstown bus, and you can use that idea to get over to the other side of the park most of the time, unless something complicated is going on, and then your model isn't going to help you. It's like that. So all of these tools, they have a value. You can do something with them, but they're all a little short of being a perfect representation of reality. And if you try to take the tool as being the reality, that gap is going to leave you disappointed. That gap is going to leave you with some difficulty, some problem, right? The ego is the same kind of thing. So, part of what we talk about in Zen practice is this, let's say, this paradox that fundamentally all of these conceptual understandings that we have they're not fundamentally real, meaning that they're not the same as raw reality. And so it's necessary for us to experience raw reality, for us to experience the absolute, the fundamental, experience the perspective of not self. And then we also have to come back. We have to come back and be able to pick up our tools and do things in daily life and use the concepts that we have to accomplish things. And I happen to personally think that the Zen school, one of the ways it excels is in working on that synthesis, is in constantly training us both to set down the tools and experience emptiness. And then a minute later, the bell rings and the sit's over, and we have to stand up and we have to do something in the real world, and we have to do it precisely, and we have to do it quickly. And all along the path of the training, they're both halves, they're both sides. And we have to get good at doing both, at moving swiftly and seamlessly and gracefully back and forth between the fundamental perspective and the relative perspective. And I think there's another bit of that to be emphasized. So in that milieu, the truth is that we are all very familiar with the relative side. We are all very familiar with the experience of picking up one of our tools and doing something in the day-to-day world. We're all very experienced in making a cup of coffee or whatever we do that we're comfortable with. But a lot of us are not familiar with the experience of letting all the tools go. A lot of us are not familiar with seeing through, with seeing the ground of reality. And so in the Zen project, that's the part that has to be focused on first, is breaking through, is seeing from the absolute perspective. Because if all of our prior experience is in the one bucket and the other half of functioning is unfamiliar since our days of infancy, then we have to touch that part. We have to touch the ultimate part. And we have to have that experience not just as another tool, not just as a concept that I can talk about with my mouth, but it has to be a direct experience. And I'm going to go back to this tool idea again. If you pick up a hammer and a nail, if you put the nail in something, hammer it down, you don't have any doubt about whether or not you've had the experience of hammering a nail. It never occurs to you to ask, did I just hammer a nail? Is that the same hammering a nail experience that I've heard other people talk about? You don't think that. Nobody has ever thought that, right? It's honestly an absurd question. And the same is true for the experience of no self, the experience of kensho, the Japanese word. That experience has to be lived in such a way that there is no question the experience has been achieved. The same as the way you know that you're sitting on a cushion on the floor. There's no room for doubt, and in fact, raising the doubt is ridiculous. It makes no sense. Got it? Right. And the last bit, and practically speaking, how do we do this? So if you're willing to believe me that we have all of these tools, we have all of these ideas, these shortcuts, these models that help us to do different things that we need to do in our lives, how do we learn to put them all down? How do we get to that part? And this is one of the many things where the answer is so simple that it's kind of hard to say out loud. In Zazen, we are practicing breath by breath, just not picking up another thing. You know, you know the thousand-armed Kanzeon statues in the Garden Zendo? Either side of the Garden Zendo altar, there's a Sanju Kanon with all the arms down the sides. And each arm is holding something, right? So imagine that you're coming into Zazen kind of like that, but not in a helpful way. You know, you've got your two arms and they're both just full of things that you're holding on to. And you need to be able to put them down. You need your hands free to be able to deal with the next thing. So as we sit, particularly on the out breath, just don't pick anything else up. Just don't grab. Things will come up in your meditation. Thoughts, emotions, memories, sensations. Fine, no problem. Just don't grab them as they go by. Don't close your hand around them. And slowly, as we breathe out, as we breathe out, as we let go, as we let go, things will fall out of your hand over time. Things will fall out of the grip of your mind over time. And that's all that has to happen. It just has to settle. It just has to loosen until the hands are empty, tools are gone, there's no reference to the self anymore, and you're really ready to do what comes next, whatever that is.